In this video, I'm going to show how to solve radical equations, specifically equations with square roots in them. This is a lesson that I've gone through before, and if you remember, I had kind of laid out some steps in how to solve a radical equation, so if you want to pause this and write things down, feel free. But remember, the first thing we need to do is isolate the radical, then we're going to square both sides, then we're going to solve for that variable, and then we're going to check for extraneous solutions. So I have my first equation here. This one won't take very many steps, but if we go through it, we needed to isolate the radical, which it already is. And then once that radical is isolated, then we need to square both sides. And the reason we do that is because we want to, what I like to say is undo the square root. I have the square root of g. How do I get rid of the square root? I square it. So when I square this left side, now I'm left with this g. Right side equals 25. My equation is solved. But anytime we're working with a radical equation, we need to check that solution. So now I go back and I check it. So it says the square root of, well, g, we figured that out to be 25. And it says equals 5. I like to put a little question mark here. I'm going to figure out if this is actually true. And then what I do is I just go through and I simplify the left side, I simplify the right side. If I come out to have the same number, I know that it checks out, and I have a solution. So left side, square root of 25 is 5. Right side is 5, already simplified. Those are equal to each other. That checks out. Therefore, g equal to 25 is a solution to that equation. Now, if I take a look at this equation, very similar to the last one, the radical is already isolated. So I can go ahead and square both sides to get rid of the square root. And now I'm left with h equal to 64. So you'd think 64 is my solution. But again, remember, we always have to check it. So I come back and I go, it says the square root of h, which my h value we figured out to be 64, equals, or does it equal, and then it says negative 8. So again, I'm going to work on simplifying both sides. Square root of 64, that's 8. Right side of the equation, though, is negative 8. Now I look at this and go, well, 8 does not equal negative 8. They're not equal, so it doesn't check. So does that mean that I did something wrong when I solved my equation over here? No, I didn't. I look back and I go, I squared both sides. If I square the left side, I get h. I square the right side, negative 8 squared is 64. So what that's telling me is this h equal to 64, that is an extraneous solution, an extra solution. Which really means there's no solution to this equation. So if I were asked to solve this equation, when it's all said and done, I would say there's no solution. Because the solution that appeared to be there is extraneous. And sometimes that happens. So sometimes there is no solution. Now we're gonna go through the multiple steps on solving this and figuring out what the value of r is. So again, I go back to those steps. The first thing is to isolate the radical. Well, that's this part right here that I have to get all by itself. So I look at that and go, well, that means I'm going to have to get rid of that minus r. So to get rid of the minus r, I'm going to add r to both sides. Now I have the square root piece all by itself. Right side is going to equal, I'm going to put this in descending order, so it's going to say r plus 1. If you wrote 1 plus r, that's fine. Now that my radical is all by itself, now I can square both sides. Now when you square both sides, you have to square the side, not just square the parts. Left side, we now have 5r plus 11. And the right side, if I square this, I like to think of it this way, where it's really r plus 1 times r plus 1. And then I don't have that squared there. Okay? I'm going to get rid of this part just so that it's not confusing if you want to look back at this. That's what we're doing right there. So if I square this, I'm going to have to FOIL it, and when I do, I'm going to end up with r squared plus r, which is going to be 2r, and then plus 1. Now I look at this and notice I have a quadratic equation because of this r squared right here. So now I think back, how do I solve a quadratic equation? I like to get one side equal to 0, because then I can solve by factoring if that's a possibility, or I'd use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to subtract 5r, and I'm going to, subtract 11. I got a little typo here. Let me fix that. And now we carry on. So here I have the left side equal to 0. The right side is r squared minus 3r minus 10. And like I said, this is where I would solve by factoring if possible. And when I look at it, I notice that this trinomial is factorable, r and r. Now I look for factors of negative 10 that add up to negative 3. So that'd put me at minus 5 and plus 2, still equal to 0. And remember, we set each one of these factors equal to 0. And we solve these two little equations. So we add 5 to both sides. We just figured out that r equals 5. Subtract 2 from both sides, and we just figured out that r equals negative 2. So you look at this and you think two solutions. But be careful, because remember, we have to go back and we have to check those solutions. So I'm going to go back to this original equation, and I'm going to put 5 into that equation. Let's see if I can squeeze it in right here. So I have the square root of 5. Now I'm going to multiply it by that r value that I just got, which was 5. Add on the 11. Subtract that r value, which is 5. And then it's supposed to equal 1. The question is, will it? So again, I go through and I just simplify the whole left side. And then when I do that, I notice that, well, 5 times 5 is 25, plus 11 is underneath that square root. Still have the minus 5. This ends up being the square root of 36. Square root of 36 is 6. 6 minus 5 is 1. So I've simplified the whole left side. The right side is 1. I like to put my little checks so that I know that it checks out. And then I come down here and I go, well, 5 is a solution. It worked out. But then I still have to check the negative 2. So now I check the negative 2. Again, go back to that original equation, excuse me. So square root of 5 times my r value, which is negative 2, plus the 11, minus negative 2. And again, it's supposed to equal 1. So I just work on simplifying both sides. So now I have negative 10 plus 11 underneath my radical. This I would add to. So this is the square root of 1 here, still plus 2. 1 plus 2 equals 3. But it's supposed to equal 1. It does not. Therefore, I come down here. I cross this one off because that's an extraneous solution. So for this equation that appeared to have two solutions to it, it only has one. So r equals 5 is the only solution to this original equation. And that's going to end our lesson on solving radical equations.